Oh, hi. My name is Chace. I'm descended from a rather loquacious whaling master who raised my father and was much like a grandfather to me. He was noted not only for his success as a whaler, but for his storytelling as well, which he did a number of times in New Bedford. And even at this museum, he would come every day in the winter and tell stories to the school children. So I grew up listening to these stories. Well, in 1960, a few years after his passing, I found myself a senior in high school. I was working at Woolworths, located on Pope's Island. It was a convenient run from my house in Fairhaven across the Fairhaven Bridge to work. That was my replacement for missing practice with the track team. Now there was a building, an empty piece of the building right next to Woolworths, where there was a rather large space where a furniture store had been shuttered. Well, I'd been working there about a year, and suddenly the area was rented. They were bringing in a huge whaling panorama, 1,200 feet of canvas. Wow, who would paint that? I was wondering if some of the pictures would match some of the stories I'd heard from my great uncle. Well, it had only just opened when the curator came to me and he asked me what equipment I used to clean the floor at Woolworths. Well, I showed him the dry mop I used and the big tall bucket on wheels. I could put the mop way down inside and shake the dust off. Well, he thought that a better way to clean the floor than raising dust with a broom. So he asked if I would like to clean the floors there a couple of times a week for a stipend. Sure. I knew I'd get a chance to see the panorama. So over the next few weeks, I got a pretty good look at the paintings on that panorama. I was kind of pleased to note that there was a lot of pictures of chasing whales and whales fighting back, which seemed to be the gist of a lot of the stories I heard from Uncle Charlie. And I guess the artist found that to be equally interesting. I don't even recall if I ever read the brochure that went with it, so I didn't know anything about the artist. Well, that September of that year, we got hit with a hurricane. I spent the night before it hit with the store manager and the stockroom manager setting up boards in front of our display windows. The curator brought in a crew of carpenters to build a wooden wall in front of the windows at the panorama. Well, the next morning that hurricane hit, and we got 150-mile-an-hour gusts. I came back to work on Saturday morning. And I spent the day picking up glass in the display areas. We'd lost 2 windows, despite the fact that was behind a wooden wall. The panorama also lost 2 windows. Well, we didn't get much damage to anything we had on display, and to the best of my knowledge, there was no damage to the panorama. But it wasn't long after that they took it out of there. Well, it would be 58 years before I would learn anything more about that panorama. I was retired, and I was spending a good bit of time doing research into the whalers in my family ancestry. But I wasn't yet a docent when I had learned that the panorama was on display at a retired factory in the south end of New Bedford. Well, that summer I went there several times. I went myself, I went with my wife, I brought my grandson, really toured that thing and learned a lot. Panorama had been restored, so it didn't look quite like it did before. If you look closer, you could see places where they patched the canvas and maybe did a little bit of touch-up painting, the work was phenomenal, really good. I mean, it was, if it wasn't for the fact that one of the panels, one section of that panorama had been lost before the museum ever acquired it, it must look every bit today like it did in its original glory. Well, I learned that Benjamin Russell went to sea on a whaling voyage where he must have taken a bunch of notes and sketches. And when he got back from that voyage a few years later, he teamed up with a sign painter named Caleb Purrington, and they built and painted the panorama. Well, it was mounted like on scrolls, and it was brought to cities all around the eastern half of the country, where it would be shown to the public. Men would crank the scrolls so that the panorama came past in front of you, a little bit like a modern cinema. And there was a narrator reading the story of each section of the picture to you. Well, you can see it like that today. The museum has done a full-size video of it up on a screen, and historians from the museum have recreated the narration, and it has to be really close to the original. So if you're sitting there watching that, just imagine that you're watching it in 1849. Thank you for your time.